right. What's up, everybody? If you're watching the video, you know that there's an all-new setup over here. We got all new equipment and everything, but unfortunately, the title is not Clickbait. This is the final episode of the Deitsch podcast. It feels weird for me to say that. It's been a nice run, but it's time for me to kill this project. I'm totally kidding. I'm not completely kidding, but I'm killing the Deitsch podcast as we know it right now. But if you've been paying attention, I haven't really been uploading as frequently as I have been in the past. And it's mainly just because I've been working nonstop on other projects. And quite frankly, the podcast has taken a backseat to all of those projects. So the TLDR of the situation is that I'm putting the Deitsch podcast on hiatus indefinitely, but the best news is that I'm actually launching a brand new podcast that you guys will be able to listen to every single week. I'm super excited about this new project, and I think it's really the next evolution of what I've been able to create here. But so now that I've broken the big news, I kind of wanted to take a second to step back and talk about how the podcast has, just changed my life, because I've never really summarized my story all in one place before, and I hope that you guys can get a lot of value out of this story, because it's basically the story of how I went from having no skills, no equipment, no platform, to being 2 years later a podcaster with over 200 episodes recorded, professional video creator with over 7 million views on my YouTube videos and over 1 billion views on my GIFs. And those numbers don't even feel real. It feels surreal to even say that. But yeah, so when I started the Deitsch podcast over 2 years ago, I was in a very weird transitionary time in my life, and I never really shared this part of it because I was just trying to be as professional and cool as I could possibly seem. But the truth is, I was living at my parents' house, and I pretty much had no real direction in my life. I was working a day job that I actually did like it, but I knew it wasn't any kind of final destination, and I didn't really see a big future there. And I'd been listening to podcasts for the past few years, and the whole concept always seemed like such a cool idea to me. And I was really inspired by people like Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss, who had created platforms where they could pretty much talk to anyone on the planet that they wanted to. And in the summer of 2017, my friend Graham Curry invited me to be a guest on his podcast. And after we recorded that episode, it was pretty much just game over, because I knew that if Graham could do it, then I could do it. And I just needed to take that first step. And I had a lot of cool friends and connections that I knew would want to be on the show, but I had no equipment and, most importantly, no experience. And I had no camera, no recording equipment, no experience editing audio. And all I had was an old laptop that could barely squeak by. It was running the bootleg version of Photoshop on it. And I definitely couldn't run any intensive video editing programs. If I tried to edit a video on it, and I remember it couldn't even load 1080p footage at 4th resolution. It was terrible. So after over the next few weeks, I bought the equipment that I needed, and I started running around town recording as many podcasts as I could. I was completely obsessed. And I just had this idea where I wanted to create this, platform where I could talk to my heroes. I remember nights where I would stay up editing episodes until I couldn't even keep my eyes open anymore. I would fall asleep with the lights on every single night. And sometimes I would actually go to work at the gym because they had good Wi-Fi. And I didn't, I wanted to get out of the house. I wanted to work somewhere else, but they had good Wi-Fi and they were open 24/7. And I actually wouldn't even work out until I was finished working on my podcast stuff. And I remember one night I was working on my laptop until 4:30 in the morning, and people started coming in to get their workout in before they went to work. It was insane. I remember when I left, they were like, "Have a good day." And I'm like, "Jeez, I need to go to sleep." But I was still working my day job. Every other moment I had was spent building the podcast, and the idea that I could start this thing from the ground up and eventually have conversations with my heroes was just something I couldn't get it out of my head. And it reminded me of the experiment where someone takes a paper clip and keeps trading and trading and trading until they get a house or something, So I finally launched the podcast on my 23rd birthday on May 28th, 2017. And I gained a small audience pretty quickly, which was dope. But the project just grew and grew and grew. And later that year, I attended a seminar in Tampa hosted by Ryan McGinn that just changed my life. And at the time, Ryan was someone that I watched on YouTube. I didn't even know him personally, but during the seminar, Ryan showed us how to leverage a personal brand. And most importantly, he taught us the principles and strategy behind making dope little Instagram stories with a GoPro. And I was so inspired by what he taught us that I went home and I picked up a GoPro on eBay like right after I got home from the trip, and I immediately started jumping into video editing. And this was something that I picked up fairly easily, and I realized that I knew more about editing videos than I thought, basically just due to my weird obsession with like cameras and YouTubers for the past years. I loved watching Casey Neistat and Peter McKinnon. They were some of my biggest inspirations at the time because they really knew how to tell a great story through video. And through the knowledge that I gained, by watching them, that even before I had a real camera, I was able to kind of understand the theory behind what made a video great. So I started making short little videos with my GoPro as often as I could, and I got pretty decent at making them over time. But around that time, my friend John Wiesenberg had just gotten into photography, and he invited me to be a second shooter at this yoga event that he was shooting. And I knew pretty much nothing about photography, and I borrowed a Canon Rebel, which is really funny now, but from my friend Maya Elias, who was my guest actually on episode 70, and I took some really terrible photos at that event. It was bad, but it was a great experience for me, and I just started gaining confidence behind the camera. And the next time we did an event, I brought my friend Armand, who had a Canon 80D, and I decided to shoot some videos at that event too. And they never asked us to shoot the videos. They just were expecting photography. But the next day I was flying out to Colorado to visit a friend. So I edited a video on the plane and sent it to them like the next day. And they were so stoked. They were over the moon about the video. And they wanted me to come again next week to make another one. And so keep in mind, I was doing all this for free, but I was getting my experience in. I was definitely providing tons of value to them, but I was also getting experience in event photography and video, getting comfortable shooting other people. And I knew that my little GoPro just wasn't cutting it, so I decided to step up to the big leagues and buy a quote-unquote real camera. And I bought a Canon 70D for my buddy Alec Robertson for like $750. And this totally changed the game for me, upgraded my video capabilities, and I made a lot of videos with that camera, honestly, that I'm still really proud of. But somewhere in this timeline, I met two of the most instrumental people in this whole story, those two people being Richard Corbett and Katia Sarmiento. And my friend Sheen Dar from episode 38 had actually told me about Richard, and she knew him from the gym, and she said that he would be perfect for my show. And I didn't really know anything about him. I couldn't find much about him from social media. His Facebook was basically empty. His Instagram had like 7 photos on it. And all I knew was that Richard had a crazy story, and I could tell from a video on his Instagram that he used a wheelchair. And this was like episode 47. And by this point, it wasn't uncommon for me to just like show up and do a podcast with anyone. So I was eager to meet up with him. And we met up at the art studio that he was working out of. And when I got there, he wasn't in his wheelchair. He like hobbled out to my car to introduce himself. And I was like, this is so weird, but like whatever. And once we started recording, he shared his whole story with me of how he got a spinal cord injury and, what he's up to now. And it was actually the first time that he had shared his story publicly. And still to this day, it's one of my favorite episodes. It's episode 47. And Richard told me that after the episode came out, he listened to it over and over and over again. And I met Kat shortly after that, and she was speaking at an event I attended. And after the event, I reached out to her to see if she wanted to do a podcast with me. And we ended up meeting up at her beautiful high-rise apartment in Buckhead, floor-to-ceiling windows. It was like one of the most beautiful apartments I'd ever been in, honestly. And we recorded episode 58 of the podcast in her office there. And I knew that she was someone that I definitely wanted to spend more time around because she was obviously doing something right as far as business was concerned. And these were exactly the types of people and connections that I wanted to make through the show. And at some point during our conversation, she asked me a question that resulted in me basically revealing that I was still working a measly old day job. And she was pretty surprised by that. And actually, after the podcast, she encouraged me to pursue my entrepreneurial ventures and start offering my video and podcast services to other clients. And I was still like super insecure in my abilities, but she saw my potential and she encouraged me to basically just pursue my dream. So over the next few months, she taught me everything I needed to know to finally land some of my first clients, and she showed me my true worth as an entrepreneur. And at some point, I introduced Kat to Richard, and that was just the start of an awesome relationship between the three of us. And Richard was feeling bored creatively after he stopped working out of that art studio, and he wanted to do something with video to help new wheelchair users and just be that voice that he needed when he was a newly injured wheelchair user with no direction or hope for the future. You know, his future was taken from him. And he casually mentioned to me that he wanted to make like a YouTube channel like Casey Neistat or something where he would share his life, but he didn't really have the technical skills. And keep in mind at the time, again, Richard had like no online presence besides an Instagram page that had like 80 followers. That's it. And I remember thinking that was like a really good idea. I was like, that's a really cool concept, you know, since his story was so compelling. He was a great storyteller, but I knew that it was so hard to break through on YouTube. Like I had watched a lot of creators. I even knew creators like Ryan that I mentioned earlier who had made videos for years and years and years and still didn't really make all that much through YouTube AdSense, and, you know, still struggling to get followers and keep an audience. And Richard at the time had bought like a little point and shoot camera. He had pumped out a couple videos on his YouTube channel that he called Wheels to Walking. And the videos were actually pretty good, but he knew that he wanted to upgrade his video quality and shorten his learning curve. So he was talking to Kat, and Kat suggested that he should hire me to make his YouTube videos. And at the time, I really wanted to work for myself, but I didn't have enough clients to justify quitting my job yet. And I also really wanted a place to record my podcast to start introducing video into the equation. And all the biggest podcasts I looked up to had a video element, but I knew that was like a huge part of stepping up to the big leagues, but I just didn't have a place to do that. The problem was I was still living in my parents' house. I had no space to convert into a podcasting studio, let alone a place to even call my own. So I figured this would be something that would eventually happen, maybe a couple years down the road. But I needed to get my own place first. You know, that was a main priority, is get out of my parents' house. And then the second priority would be to get a studio. So, you know, this idea was always in the back of my head, but I figured it was, you know, years down the road probably before I would even number one, get a podcasting studio, but number two, even upgrade my equipment and all that kind of stuff. But Richard knew that in order to reach the most people, he needed me on his team. So in addition to paying me to help him build out the Wheels to Walking YouTube channel, Richard basically enticed me to be around him more by making my dreams come true and offering to let me convert his bedroom into my personal podcast studio, which is like, if you think about it, that's nuts that he would let me take over an entire third of his condo as a 1-bedroom condo. But he really wanted to make Wheels to Walking work. So we worked on converting his bedroom into my studio, and we moved his bedroom into the living room. And this was nuts for me. I mean, it was a signaling of a new era of the podcast. I knew video was going to be a huge game changer for me. And all while this was happening, we were shooting videos for the launch of the Wheels to Walking YouTube channel. And for months, we worked on infrastructure, Patreon, email list stuff, setting up his website, and just making sure we had enough content to last us through the launch so that we wouldn't have to focus on shooting videos for a while. And we officially launched the Wheels to Walking channel on February 27th of 2019 with a video called Why I Use a Wheelchair If I Can Walk. And the video naturally blew up on Facebook pretty good, actually, after being shared on a pretty big page. And it got around 400,000 views in the first couple of weeks. And we were freaking out about this, honestly. You know, it was our first viral hit or whatever you want to call it. And it really just motivated us to keep making these videos. And we kept uploading at a constant rate. Every single week we would upload a new video, and the YouTube channel was actually growing at a pretty good rate, but nothing like too crazy. I think we had a few thousand subscribers, and for a new channel, like a brand new YouTube channel, 1,000 subscribers, you know, a couple thousand subscribers is really impressive, but definitely not enough to justify the money and the time that was going into making all these videos. And we were starting to penetrate the disability community with these videos since they were really high quality, because no one out there was really making this level of stuff. But in July of 2019, that's when everything really started to ramp up. And the first video that we made, the one that I just talked about, started just blowing up on YouTube out of nowhere. And it eventually hit the YouTube trending page for a couple of days. And that video got actually over 1.5 million views in the course of just a few days. And we gained like tens of thousands of subscribers. It was nuts. Actually, I was overseas when it was all happening. And like me and my brother were just looking at the numbers every day, like freaking out. And ever since then, it hasn't been the same. Every week we're getting tons of new subscribers and we're growing and reaching so many types of people neither one of us ever thought that we would reach. And during this whole process, we were recording a behind the scenes podcast documenting everything that's been happening. And that podcast is actually available through the Wheels to Walking Patreon, which is behind like a small paywall. It costs just $1 to listen to all of them if you're curious to go back and listen to all of those podcasts. And it's actually kind of crazy because we've been keeping a log, like almost like a captain's log of everything that's been going on behind the scenes. And as of now, we recorded over 40 episodes of that podcast. So even though I wasn't doing as many of my own podcasts this year, I was still scratching that podcasting itch with Richard every single week. And recently, I've just been really uninspired, honestly, with the Andrew Deitsch podcast. Mainly, it did its job of allowing me to meet some of the most amazing people. I mean, I can think of a handful right off the top of my head. Ed Bolian, Will Clark. I mean, like, I've gotten to meet some really dope people, and I got really good at this. I mean, I think I got really good at my craft. It's given me tons of credibility. It's given me the skill of being a better listener, better conversationalist. And I'm just like so grateful for that. But at the risk of sounding like a total douchebag, I've pretty much talked to everyone that I'm interested in talking to within the Atlanta area. And I mean, besides like, you know, Usher or something like that, like I really feel like if I want to continue talking to people that I really want to chat with, I would need to fly around or have people fly to me. And the in-person element of podcasting is so important to me. And that's just something I'm not willing to sacrifice on. So I just knew that if I really wanted to grow this, I needed to level up again. But Wheels to Walking is just taking off so quickly, and it's gained such an impressive and a loyal fan base so quickly that it just seems really silly not to direct all of our collective energy towards that project, because it's like, why tend to this fire over here that, you know, is a little bit smaller when we've got a bonfire that we can just dump gasoline on. So basically, in short, I'm going to be putting the Andrew Deitsch podcast on hold for a while. I'll probably still record episodes here and there with people who I'm, you know, really compelled to talk to, but I will hold no expectations of how frequently I'm going to upload. But the most exciting news is that Richard and I are going to be launching the Wheels to Walking podcast to the public, no longer behind a paywall. And that is actually launching tomorrow. Every single week, I'm going to be co-hosting with Richard. We're going to be talking about current events, YouTube and tech stuff. We're going to be answering audience questions, and of course, sharing a behind the scenes look at what we're cooking up on the channel. And of course, just like the weird relationship that Richard and I have. And I honestly think that this podcast is going to be our branch into the mainstream, as our YouTube videos are mainly directed at newly injured wheelchair users. But the podcast is going to allow us to talk about a wider variety of subjects and interact more with our audience. So if you enjoy the Andrew Deitsch podcast, you will definitely enjoy listening to the Wheels to Walking podcast. Hopefully this story that I just told, you know, of kind of start to finish of, you know, when I started the podcast to where we are now, hopefully that can inspire some of you guys to, you know, pursue what you want in life and just to take action. For me, that was spending, you know, some money to upgrade my tools that would allow me to create. I had to spend money to figure out how to host my podcast, to build my podcast, to actually pay for the full versions of the Adobe Creative Suite, to upgrade my laptop. But the biggest thing that I think is holding people back from starting that thing is the fear of failure. But if you listen to my podcast, I talk about this all the time. Failure is the only way that you can learn and move on, right? And the Andrew Deitsch podcast is definitely far from a failure. Starting the podcast was the best thing I've ever done, and it honestly changed my life. And I'm just so grateful for where I'm at now. And this isn't goodbye. It's not completely goodbye. This is just me letting you guys know that I'm taking my podcasting talents to the Wheels to Walking feed every single week, and I really hope that you guys join me over there. So again, tomorrow we're launching the podcast. I'm going to be posting the first episodes of the Wheels to Walking podcast actually on this feed, so you guys can get a feel for the show. So, you know, if you're still subscribed to my show, you'll get to listen to a few of those episodes here, but I would really encourage you guys to go over to that new feed. You just search Wheels, the number 2 Walking. I'm sure I'll have the link in the show notes. We're really trying to get on the new and noteworthy section on iTunes. And the 3 biggest metrics that we need to get on there is new subscribers. So clicking that subscribe button, plays and downloads. So if you just play the episodes and download them to your phone, that really helps us out. And then those written reviews and ratings, those really help us out. And iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever you want to call it, is the number 1 place that we just really need your help. And of course, the podcasts are going to be available on video, just like the Deitsch podcast. You can go subscribe on YouTube. But again, I'll link all that stuff down below. But thank you guys again so much for 2.5 years of podcasting over here on the Deitsch podcast. And I can't wait to see where the new project goes. So thank you guys so much for listening. And it's not goodbye, but it's a see you later.